I just want a second look.
Yeah, there's something about this one, isn't there? It's familiar somehow.
We think we're stuck in a specific fragment in time, and we've been repeating that same fragment over and over.
But the flirting's over, Sherlock. Daddy's had enough now.
Hello and welcome to You've Seen It Before, TV reviews of Connections in Mind. Star Trek Discovery has finally hit the small screen with the premiere episode airing on CBS's main channel, and all subsequent episodes are being released on CBS All Access, their paid streaming service. And in the pilot episode, we are introduced to Sonequa Martin Green as Commander Michael Burnham, the adopted sister of Spock, and the adopted daughter of his father Sarek. And we get to see that interesting dynamic of her as she serves aboard the USS Shenzhou as they encounter a mysterious object that they don't know what it is, but it turns out to be a group of radical Klingons who the Federation has not heard from in almost 100 years. And this group of Klingons is hell-bent on essentially waging war on the Federation after so long because they fear for their very survival. Now, this video review will contain spoilers of the first 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery, as well as certain other films and TV shows. There will be a full list in the description below. And if you have not seen the first 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery yet and want to wait until you have, stop the video at this point and come back later. But with these things in mind, though, let's begin. So Star Trek Discovery focuses on Commander Michael Burnham as she navigates her duties as the Shenzhou's first officer, and she finds herself in contention with her captain, mainly Michelle Yeoh, as Captain Philippa Georgiou, I believe is how you pronounce it, and they're in contention over how best to deal with this Klingon situation. Commander Burnham has been taught that by Sarek that Klingons respect shows of force, and she believes that they should fire first in order to stave off a future war, whereas Captain Georgiou is attempting a more diplomatic approach as per Starfleet's procedure, but unfortunately this leads to the Klingons acting aggressively, and they eventually start the war that is feared and is referenced in the original Star Trek series from the 1960s. Now, there are many things that this show references, and ordinarily I don't like to point out references within a franchise, since this is a continuation of a long-lived franchise, and in these sorts of things, it's understandable that there will be references and callbacks to things that have come before it. However, since this is set in a unique time frame, mainly 10 years before the events of the original Star Trek series, and about 100 years after the events of Star Trek Enterprise, and this is set in the prime time universe, theoretically, then it is important to note that references of the things that in the timeline-wise will not happen for many years to come, at least in this universe, and these things will in fact be are references to things that have come before, even if they're unintentional. So there are many things to count on, but here are some of the more obvious ones that I noticed. There may be more, who knows? Now, there are many references to other Star Trek franchises that have come before it. I'll just point out some of the more obvious ones that I noted. First off, in the pilot episode, we get to see Commander Burnham don a rocket pack and fly outside of the Shenzhou and to navigate an asteroid field, which is a reference to a similar scene in Star Trek The Motion Picture, in which Spock donned a rocket pack and traveled outside of the Enterprise through the ship known as Voyager. Also, the very tone of this series, at least the first couple episodes, namely the fact that the Klingons are fearing for their survival, or at least a small number of them are fearing for their survival from the Federation, and as they believe their individuality of their race is at stake, and they're fearing that they're going to be extinct in a sense. This is very reminiscent of the tone set by the Klingon characters in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, where we also see a group of Klingons who are fearful of peaceful intentions from the Federation. Of course, that is after the long and bloody Klingon Federation conflicts. Also, there's right around the end of the pilot episode, there is a scene in which Captain Georgiou of the Shenzhou is monitoring a large group of Klingon ships dropping out of warp in front of her, and she tells her communications officer to open a channel to Starfleet, tell them we have engaged the Klingons. Now, this is a very obvious reference to Star Trek The Next Generation, namely the episode The Best of Both Worlds, in which Captain Picard tells Worf to open a channel to Starfleet and says, we have engaged the Borg. Also, there's an interesting dynamic here in the relationship between Commander Burnham and Captain Georgiou, which plays out more so in episode 2 rather than the pilot episode. Namely, the fact that Commander Burnham believes she understands the Klingons better than her captain, but her captain believes that they should follow a diplomatic course when dealing with the Klingons. Of course, this leads to Commander Burnham actually attempting a mutiny in order to fire first on the Klingons because she believes she's in the right and that this is how you deal with them. But the captain actually is able to overturn the mutiny, and she ends up confining Commander Burnham to the brig. But eventually, near the end of episode 2, she's forced to reevaluate her opinions, and the captain is forced to rely on Commander Burnham in order to get them out of the situation safely. This is very reminiscent to the relationship between Captain Janeway and Commander Chakotay in Star Trek Voyager, namely the third season finale, fourth season premiere episode Scorpion, in which Captain Janeway is trying to deal with the Borg Collective in a diplomatic manner, but Chakotay is deeply untrustful of her, and he ends up going short, challenging her so many times that Janeway ends up relieving him of command, of duty, and confining him to his quarters. But by the end, Captain Janeway is forced to realize that the Borg cannot be trusted, and she relies on Chakotay in order to foil a Borg attempt to capture Voyager. Now, also aesthetic-wise, now this is understandable given that this is now 2017 rather than 1966, but the fact remains that even though this Star Trek Discovery is set 10 years before the events of the original 1960s Star Trek, the feel of the ship and the technology, the cinematography as well, is more reminiscent of the feel of the Abrams-verse or Kelvin timeline Star Trek films, namely Star Trek 2009, Star Trek Into Darkness, and Star Trek Beyond. This is very reminiscent. This is very evident in the way that shots are composed, the color palettes. As well as certain transitions. There's a certain way in which Commander Burnham has flashbacks to her childhood, and the flashbacks are accomplished by essentially lens flares. So there's an interesting callback to Abrams style Star Trek shooting. Now, with all these being said, the great question is this series worth your money at this point? Remember, they aired only the first episode of Star Trek Discovery on CBS for free, whereas all other episodes you have to pay $10 for commercial-free access through the rest of the run of the series, and they're only releasing these episodes every week rather than like Netflix, where they're releasing the whole season at once. And so you can't just do a free trial and binge the whole thing. So, is it worth your money? I would say yes, but I would also take CBS to task for the fact that they did not market this well at all. They botched the way that they rolled this out, and I'll tell you why. At the end of the pilot episode, episode 1, we find ourselves, we're really only interested in Commander Burnham at this point. None of the other characters have really done anything worthy of our attention at this point. Really the only people who get like names that are even referenced more than once, in fact, are, other than Michael Burnham, the captain, Philippa Giorgio, as well as the science officer and second officer, Lieutenant Commander Saru, who is very analytical, and he has an interesting ability where apparently his species has been bred since the coming of death, which is the one interesting line from the trailers. And at this point, Commander Burnham has already attempted mutiny on the Shenzhou, and she has failed, but a large armada of Klingon ships is bearing down on the solitary Federation starship, and then the episode ends. And they expect us to go to the CBS All Access and watch the second episode, which was available immediately after the airing of the first episode. And if the first episode was intended to be a hook to make people want to pay to see the rest of the story, but they cut it after 1 hour right in the middle of a really dumb cliffhanger without sufficient character development on anyone's part. Now, this is very interesting. I don't know why they did it this way, since every other Star Trek series that's premiered since Star Trek The Next Generation has had a 2-episode back-to-back pilot night in order to tell a full story and in order to set the tone from the going forward. And why they didn't do that this time, I don't know. But the second episode definitely improves the storyline. It does complete the story as told from the start of the first episode to a nice conclusion as far as that goes. It sets up things nicely. It does develop the characters very well, in fact, especially Commander Burnham. At this point, we know that she is the main character of the show, and it's going to be interesting, especially from the fact that all other Star Trek series previously have had more of a focus on an ensemble group of people, whereas the captain is theoretically the main focus of the show. There are enough developed characters where they can support each other as they go. Right now it seems like it's just the Commander Michael Burnham show, and it's kind of interesting to see where they will take this, especially when in the coming episodes when they debut the actual USS Discovery with Jason Isaacs as the captain of the Discovery. And that should be an interesting thing to go as well. So far, I'm intrigued, though I'm more mad at the marketing of this series more than anything. Though, honestly, at this point, if I were given a choice between watching this show and the Star Trek spoof show from Seth MacFarlane, the USS the Orville, I would be sort of torn. I would not automatically gravitate towards the true Trek. And that's sort of an indictment on this show that, yes, it is pretty to look at. Yes, it has some interesting things to go on, but it's nothing we haven't really seen before. And so far, while they are giving us things to care about, it's not a whole lot right now. So it'll be interesting to see where they go going forward. So my final thoughts on this is, yes, I would say at this point it is worth your time and whatever monthly cash that you can spend. It's $9.99 for commercial-free access to CBS All Access, and it is definitely worth checking out. So there you have it. There's my review of the first 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. I had originally only wanted to review the pilot episode, and I had actually filmed my review of the pilot episode, but I decided that it was only fair to do the review of the first 2 episodes, and I'm glad I did, because honestly, it was late when I watched the pilot episode, and the way they ended it kind of made me mad. So I'm glad I had time to stop and absorb and think about what this series would impact on me and analyze it before giving you my honest review on it. So there's that, and also be sure to look for my next movie review of American Made coming out September 29th, as well as my next TV review of the season 2 of Stranger Things, which is going to be coming out October 27th, I believe. So, thank you all for watching. I appreciate whatever audience I can get, and just remember, there's nothing new under the sun, and yes, you have seen it before.